Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Beyond the BSc Horizon. So in today's episode, we have special guest as usual. So we have Dr. Monique Williams from the Department of Molecular and Cell Biology. And next to her, we have her PhD student, Molopo. So how are you guys feeling today?
Good, although this is definitely a new experience. I'm much more comfortable in a lab than in front of the camera.
Yeah, I'm feeling good as well. A bit nervous, but I'm a yapper, so hopefully that will kick in today, and everything will be fine.
It will be fine. I mean, as a scientist, we love challenges, so this is a challenge.
Yeah.
So maybe before we get into it, I was trying to think of a nice icebreaker for people like in molecular and cell biology. I was like, okay, what is your favorite enzyme? What does it do, and why is it your favorite?
Wow, that's a deep question. As an icebreaker. I would say, off the top of my head, lysozyme. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very common enzyme. I'm sure you know that it's something that degrades proteins, right? And I think we actually can use it to degrade the outside of bacteria, like bacterial cell walls. So it actually has useful for us as molecular biologists trying to get the components of cells out of bacteria. So it's a useful enzyme.
Okay. And you?
Okay. I'm trying to think. I think horseradish peroxidase, which I worked with when I was doing my third year project. And so through working with it, I discovered that it can be used for bioremediation. And what I was testing was trying to see if we can use it to remove pesticides. And I saw actually it's quite effective in doing that, even trying to remove pesticides that were quite not unknown, they're well known, but they're not being used currently because they're quite toxic. But considering it's one of the only few enzymes that can actually do that, I found that to be very interesting. So I think, that's a cool one.
Okay, pretty cool enzymes, So maybe you can start with Dr. Monique. What is what is there in molecular and cell biology, and why should someone consider coming into molecular and cell biology at UCT?
Okay. So actually, it's quite a broad field, and I think that over the years, it's actually expanded. It's quite difficult to differentiate exactly where the borders of molecular and cell biology are. But just thinking about the word, so molecular, obviously looking at subcellular level, so looking at molecules, so things like RNA and DNA. So that would encompass, so our two majors that we offer, for example, are genetics. So that would looking at genes and how the genes actually then determine the traits of a bacteria or a multicellular organism. And then the other major that we offer is biochemistry. So this is the chemistry of life. So things there, like we've just been talking about enzymes. So for example, the study of enzymes and how they function, and then putting those things together. So for example, enzymes then work inside a pathway, and those pathways then are involved in the metabolism inside cells. And so those things are all related to each other as well, because your genes would determine which enzymes are present, when they're present, so those things like expression. So in terms of why it's expanded, now we also have big data sets. So with the advent of new technologies of being able to sequence whole genomes, so this is looking at the all the genes in a specific organism, or even looking at the expression of all the genes, so the transcriptome, you now need to be able to analyze very large data sets. So now we have a field which is bioinformatics. So that's sort of a field on its own, but it's very much related to what we actually do in molecular and cell biology. And so I would say it's actually quite a broad area. It isn't really limited to, just enzymes or just genes, but how all these things fit together.
I think that's pretty cool. I mean, my opinion is biased because biochemistry is my major, but I think that's pretty cool given that as someone who loves pathways like myself, I think then a major in molecular and cell biology, like for example biochemistry, will be very cool. So if I can take it to you, Mulapo, if you can think back, I know it's a long time ago, to matric.
Oh my gosh.
What type of a student were you, and then how did that sort of like influence what you did in your undergrad?
Okay, so I was somewhat of a student who focused a lot on the academics, of course, but I wasn't really strong when it comes to like studying and memorizing and remembering things, right? And luckily, we had like this really cool competition called ESCOM Expo for Young Scientists that I used to participate in. And I think my love for science actually came from that. And I essentially, it's one of those things where people say you have to kind of love something in order for you to, in a way, be good at it. So through participating in that competition and learning about research and writing reports and all that stuff, I started to actually develop really like love for science. And then somehow that helped me do really well when it comes to my schoolwork. So I loved life science. Also, it did help that my father teaches life sciences, so I had to really be good at it. So
Yeah.
and I had him also to help me with like the work itself, and he tutored me and all that stuff. So and also he was friends with my life science teacher, so that helped. And also physics, and my physics teacher was also fully involved in this competition. So she was the one that I worked with when it comes to creating my project, coming up with ideas and all these things. So she was like fully involved, and also through that I kind of felt the need to be good at physics and chemistry. And so yeah, in a way, it wasn't like a typical, oh yeah, I was really good at like studying, and I was like, it was through other means. My love for it developed through other means. So yeah, but I was fully involved in this competition. It was my entire life, and so that I was like, yeah, maybe I should pursue science. But what I wanted more than anything was to do postgrad. I wanted to do research. In fact, I thought when you get to undergrad, that's what you do. I thought, oh yeah, immediately get there, you're gonna start doing research. Yeah, imagine when I got here and I realized, no, I need to study again and write tests and exams. But I knew like, okay, I'm working towards that. I'm working towards postgrad because that's what I love doing.
No, that's pretty cool. And also the project that you just mentioned, ESCOM X, I was also part of that. I think it was a pretty a cool project to get you involved like in research at an early age. That's when you discover whether you love science or not.
Yeah.
So then, how would you rate like your transition from high school into undergrad? What was the culture shock?
Oh no. Yeah. It was a whole thing. So I went to Rhodes University. Let's start there because that's it had a huge influence. So I went to Rhodes University, and when I got to Rhodes, the way the curriculum was structured, it was that in first semester, the work that you do, it's quite similar to to matric work. So it wasn't that different. So I did really well when I got there in first semester. And then when we got to second semester, things were a bit different. Now we're being introduced to stuff that we did not do in high school at all. So I think I did zoology, I did a bit of physics, but physics beyond. I think I did electronics, I did botany as well, and I did computer science, and I did statistics and chemistry. So, but they were quite different to what we used to do in matric. But also during that period, it was when I was also starting to realize like there are other things I could do outside of science. Other things that I've always been passionate about from high school. And then came the dilemma of,
Okay.
am I continuing with this or am I actually going to follow my passion, which was dance?
Okay.
So I struggled a lot with that, to a point where it was eating me inside, to a point where I had to go to the dean and talk to him. I was like, listen, I don't know if I want to do this. And he looked at my matric results and he looked at my first semester results and he was like, I think you can continue with this, but let's do something that's never been done before and let's let you study humanities subject, so do drama with dance, and do science. So I did both of them. That was the most difficult thing I've ever done my entire life.
Yeah, I can imagine having to tackle
Yes.
such a variety of
It
things.
was so difficult that I actually struggled a lot in undergrad. I struggled a lot, and there's also that thing that we don't really think about, like the importance of the environment that you are in. Because the more I got involved in this faculty, this different faculty, the more I almost felt at home and I felt seen and heard, compared to in science. When you're doing science, it's all about just learning. You're being taught things, you need to memorize, you need to know this, but your opinion or your feelings don't really matter that much. It's about you learning this work that's in the textbook. So I felt almost like not seen and not heard. And then when I go to the other side of the world, I feel seen and my opinion matters.
The
And I'm
total
like,
opposite.
this is where I need to be. So I struggled a lot. I actually took me 5 years to complete my undergrad because I was just completely neglecting one thing and focusing on one thing too much, and it was just a struggle. And then eventually I did manage to find a balance, and as soon as I found a balance, I managed to finish.
Okay, so then now, like, how did you then end up deciding whether to pursue science in postgrad or continue, like, with the humanities?
So that involved a lot of introspective work, where I essentially tried. So during I think it was my last year of undergrad, I tried to find something that I can use in both science and art and use it to essentially help me decide my future. That was before I decided to actually do science. So when I applied for honors, I actually applied for biotechnology, biochemistry, as well as drama. Specializing again in theater design and physical theater. So I was like, okay, I'm just to be safe, I'll apply for everything. And then at the same time, I wondered though, like, what is the common thing between these things that I'm doing that will actually, regardless of what I end up doing, I will still feel good in terms of how I feel right now. It's like I feel happy because I found a balance between these two things. I feel like I'm not letting science down, I'm not letting art down, and I feel like I'm being true to myself. But I didn't want to lose that feeling. So I was like, what is the common thing between these things? So I realized, like, no, the common thing, essentially, what makes me happy in both of them is just creating, is getting the opportunity to be a creative, to be innovative, to come up with ideas, to really delve into those ideas and manifest them and make them, a reality. And so regardless of what I do, it did not matter. And then I got into biochemistry, and I got a firm offer for biotechnology, and I got a conditional offer for biochemistry and drama. So I ended up deciding to go with biotech because I was like, well, I looked at the curriculum for honors and everything, and it sounded really cool. And they also had a lot of interesting topics that I actually wanted to go into, such as working with microbial fuel cells. So, and through that, I also saw a chance or an opportunity for me to really be innovative because it's biotech. I mean, everybody talks about how cool biotech is, how it is like a platform for you to literally be innovative and be creative. So I was like, yeah, so I can apply this creative way of thinking that I nurtured while I was doing art in science. And yeah, and I feel like so far it's been...
Okay. I mean, that's pretty cool because I feel like for a lot of science students, we all had that battle of like, science or in something in humanity. For my side, it was like writing because I love writing, like
Yeah.
novels and poetry. But then also, I feel like also back at home, when you tell them, "Oh, I love dancing, I love," as well, like as a Black African child, they'll be like,
No.
that will not pay your bills. So I think it's always a struggle trying to find balance between the two. But
Yeah.
then also, I love what you mentioned that it seems like science is all about finding problems, coming up with hypotheses, testing them out. So like it's being innovative, and same with like anything in humanity is all about being innovative, expressing something.
Yeah.
So then now you are in a PhD. So maybe a question to the two of you: how do you then like draw the line as to whether should I just stop at honors? Should I go to masters? Do I need to go to PhD? Do I need to go to postdoc? Because I feel like for most people, like in final year, like myself, and people going into final year, we feel like there's this pressure from lecturers as to like you need to go all the way to PhD. And like, so how do you get to draw the line as to where should you end?
I think that's a good question. And I think it really does depend on where you see yourself. Sometimes I feel like students make this decision by default. You know, they sort of just go on because they're not really sure where they want to be. So it's like, okay, I finished honors. I have a bursary. Okay, let's do masters. I have a bursary. Let's do PhD. And I think that can be a trap. I think really you do need to think about where you see yourself working. What is your goal actually for doing this degree? And that will determine where you actually end. Because if you don't see yourself in academia doing research, or if you don't see yourself in industry doing research, then maybe a PhD actually isn't for you. And maybe a master's is sufficient, and you can actually then pursue whatever you want to do with just a master's, or even just an honors. So I would encourage people to actually go and do their research, go and explore. You know, UCT has an amazing careers office. Go and explore what the opportunities are out there and what the requirements are. What are they looking for? And it may actually be that you don't need a PhD, but you actually need some work experience, and so it might benefit you to actually do a master's and get a lower entry level job, and then build up experience in industry if that's where you see yourself. So I think it is very much linked to what your goal is for your career.
Okay. So maybe if I can take it back to you. So like I know it's a big jump from transitioning all the way from matric to undergrad. So now like how is it transitioning from undergrad to postgrad? Is it chilled or is it still a big jump? And then while we add on that, how was it then for you having to come like in postgrad and then coming to UCT now changing institutions while in postgrad?
Well, for me, going from undergrad to postgrad wasn't that difficult because that's what I wanted. I waited 5 years to get to do research, and finally I was like, yeah, now it's happening. So that wasn't that difficult for me. And in terms of continuing with it, that's where now things become like, because there's that thing of like what you were saying earlier about, you know, our parents have a say in a lot of things that or decisions that we make, especially when it comes to career. So I personally wanted to continue to master's and PhD because, like I said, I love research and I just cannot imagine my life without doing research. But there was that thing of like, okay, we hear you're doing research and you're talking about getting scholarships and all these things, but you need to find a job. You know, there's that thing of like, oh, okay, now I have to, I have to consider my parents. I have to consider what I want. How do I find a balance now between that? So it took a lot of convincing them and also convincing myself like I don't need to go out and find a job because this is what I want to do. I mean, also in my head, I'm like, masters and PhD, they are technically jobs to some extent, and we kind of do get paid through scholarships. So trying to convince, especially when you have got parents who are not that familiar with science as well as or academia, let me just say like. So trying to convince them, trying to make them see what you see in this career, it's very difficult. But yeah, it wasn't difficult to go to postgrad. It got a little bit difficult trying to move on to the next degree. So from honors to masters and from masters to PhD. And then what convinced me to continue with PhD, especially to go to a different university, was I think I wanted, so based on my previous work, my master's work, I did a lot of microbiology. It was biotech, but I did a lot of microbiology work where I was working with biofilms. So I found like through that project, I found really interesting things that I felt like we really need to delve deeper into understanding how this bacteria works and how these biofilms work and all that stuff. But unfortunately, through my project, we didn't do molecular and cell biology work, essentially. We didn't do a lot of it. So I wanted to go somewhere else where I can get training for that, where I can get skills for that, so that I can actually look or ask more questions, I guess, regarding this biofilm stuff. And yeah, that was one of the reasons why I wanted to go to a different university. And luckily, as I submitted my masters, I saw Monique's vacancy thing, and I was like, oh, look at the universe. And then I applied, and then I was like, yeah. But yeah, it took a lot. I had fights as well with my parents regarding doing my PhD, and they were like, no, it's you're done now. It's time for you to go find a job. And I'm like, I really want to do this though. And yeah, but after this, it's a different conversation.
Okay. So maybe I will still on that, because I think for most science students, and also like putting into consideration our parents, they always be like, what's your job after this? Like, we get it. Yeah, you posting all this cool stuff. You saw this enzyme, this, this. But what's your job actually? And I feel like also it's a concern to people doing the degree. I'm like myself, be like, okay, what are my job opportunities after this? So then, if you can tell our viewers, like, what can you do with the BSc? And then also, like, specifically in your field of molecular and cell biology, like, what career opportunities are there, like, after, like, what industries can you get into, so that people get to know, like, it's not like you're just going to sit. A BSc has so much to offer, because I think a lot of people do not know that.
So maybe to start off with the, maybe not in the immediate science sphere, I think one of the things that people don't always appreciate is that a BSc actually gives you transferable skills. So just, problem solving, analytical skills that actually can be applied in many other fields. So BSc graduates actually can then be employed in other areas. So for example, consultancy firms, because they analyze processes. Sometimes BSc graduates, even though you've done a science degree, not necessarily a commerce degree, you could actually end up working in a space like that. But coming more to then taking the science aspect of your degree further, I think, again, looking at industry, when I look around in South Africa, when I graduated, which is many, many years ago, the biotechnology space was actually very limited. And now we've seen a growth of many startup companies. Even, what happened after COVID, there were companies that started doing diagnostics and developing their own products. So I think that is an expanding sector in South Africa. It's still very small. So compared to the US or Europe, I think we still have a very small research and development sector in South Africa. But there are more companies that have actually now been doing more work in that area. So we have graduates, in the genomics space, that there have been companies that have set up and are now doing sequencing and running those sort of platforms. And we have graduates from our department who are working in that space, which wasn't there before. So I think that is quite exciting. And then also another area, if you're doing health-related research, we also have graduates that work in clinical trials. So if often we think about clinical trials as being the people that go into the field and take the samples, but there are many more jobs. There's management of that data. There's actually management of the actual project itself. So our graduates often end up in those spaces as well, because you understand the science. You may not necessarily been working in a lab specifically, but you understand the science, so you can branch out into the project management. And then there are people in when you're doing clinical trials that actually do process the samples. So although you sometimes do need additional registration in order to, sort of health professionals registration to do some of the more medical related work. And then, as Malopa was speaking about academia, so there's always that. If you are lucky enough to then go into research, and I say lucky because those positions are still quite few and far between in South Africa. So you can be a postdoc, so postdoc as in postdoctoral researcher once you finished your PhD, for a very limited amount of time. So sort of 5 years in South Africa, and then you have to now either continue on contract or you have to look for a permanent job. And those would be lectureships mostly, so attached to a university. We have very few, I would say, research institutes where people can just primarily do research. Those are mainly short-term contracts. So I think, economically that's not always advisable. So before I actually joined UCT, I was a soft-funded researcher. So what that means is you're basically on a contract. And that is related to a project. So you have project funding, which runs over short term. And that is quite stressful, for people. So it's one of the downsides that if you are really passionate about research, then you have to make the decision about, are you willing to actually be on contract, or do you want to now find a permanent job, which may not be your first choice in terms of primarily doing research.
Okay. So then definitely with the BSc, then you can do a lot of things. It just depends on your interests. So then maybe while we're on that, in your research field, what would you say makes a successful researcher in your field?
Well, interestingly, I was actually looking at an article, and it was, so I'm not sure if you are aware of Nature, the journal has these briefs, career briefs. And they did a survey on things that both academics and industries are looking for in graduates. And I was looking at the top 4 things, and the top 4 were creative thinking, passion, problem solving, and basically commitment, right? And I would think I would agree with those 4 things, right? Because as Malopa will tell you, even doing a PhD is very challenging. Things don't always go according to plan. And so you need creativity, as you've spoken about before, but you also need commitment, right? You need to be able to get up tomorrow morning after your experiment didn't work and to come back and do it again, right? Yeah. And so if you don't have that passion and commitment to science, then it's a very hard place to be. And we all have bad days, So, but I think that in research, that is one of the things that you really do need to have. You need to have the dedication that allows you to come back when things aren't working, when you submitted that paper and the journal has said, no, sorry, it's not. And we don't want to publish it. I think that looking for those things in your research, in the people you're employing, are what we look for, because we know that that's what it takes to actually be successful and to stay in the field.
Okay, so maybe then as a follow-up to the both of you, maybe for people wanting to come into your specific research field, maybe if you can briefly summarize what your PhD is looking at, and maybe just to
The
get
emphasis on
yeah,
briefly.
like what is it looking at, and where are we headed in terms of findings, so that people can see exactly like what is there in the field.
Okay. So how I typically explain this to people, I say, so my project mainly focuses on, or our goal is to understand the bacteria that we work with. And this bacteria is Mycobacterium abscessus.
Okay.
Yes.
Does it
So,
cause abscess? Or is there correlation?
It can in skin infections it will cause
Okay.
abscesses. We typically look at it in the context of lung infections, though.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
so we are aware of like it can cause infections in the body, but we're also interested in looking at its ability to form biofilms, and specifically how does it form biofilms, and we even took it a step further to look at what conditions would impact the biofilm formation. So we look at different, like mainly nutrient limitation conditions, and then also we're interested in looking at the what we call the extracellular matrix, which is essentially a coat, we can say that, in which the biofilm, so the biofilm is essentially just like a community of bacteria, which are encased in this coat, which is the matrix. So we look at the components that form the matrix, and also we quantify them, and also the last part of it, I think I summarized it so well so far. And then the last part of it is we're looking at the impact of is it new? It's we can say it's a new drug, right? A TB candidate drug called SQ109. So we're looking at the impact of it on biofilm formation. They've looked at the impact of it on just planktonic growth of the bacteria. Sorry. But we're looking at its impact on biofilm formation, and also we're looking at the impact of a surfactant called a lipid-based surfactant called I don't know the full name. I forgot the full name now, but it's DOPC in short.
Okay.
It's been shown that it can be found on the lungs. And there's a paper that actually investigated how the bacteria actually uses it to form biofilms, or its impact on biofilm formation. And they saw that it might potentially be incorporated into the biofilm instead of actually it killing the bacteria, which is what you would expect from a surfactant. So that's another thing that we're looking at. We're looking at that the DOPC's impact on biofilm formation. But the main thing, so looking at considering all these things that I mentioned, the main thing that we're also interested in looking at biofilm formation in different biofilm models. So we're trying to see all these things that I mentioned, but in different models, and then we're going to see if these models are equivalent. Because when you do drug discovery or drug target research, researchers tend to pick one model and investigate a drug. But then the thing is, there's a chance that biofilm formation in the different models might be different, and therefore the bacteria will react differently to the drug in the different models. So but then I'm still investigating that, seeing if actually the models are different, and it doesn't really matter which model you pick if you're using a drug, or actually it matters because the models are different, or the biofilm formation in the models are different. But
That's a lot. But like that's pretty cool, because I feel like as science, of course I'm going to be biased, I'm a science student, but then I feel like we always curious as to like exactly what happens in postgrad, and like it's always wonderful to have postgraduate students talk about what they do, and like, oh, I never thought you could actually just focus on such a small thing. And I think that's the interesting thing about science, focusing on one specific area and seeing what is exactly happening. And also I think then it's amazing to see like how most things that we are aware of, it's all because of scientists. Like that's just how fun science is. So then maybe as we near the closing of our podcast, what advice would you give to a young Black African child who's maybe looking to study science, but then like they have this fear? Like I said, there's a bias against the BSc. So they have this fear of like, will it get me a job? Or like, so what advice would you give to someone who wants to do science?
Okay. So what I would say is we are aware that in science it's not clear in terms of a path that you need to take in order to reach your goal in terms of what you want for yourself. It's not very obvious. That's why we have a lot of questions about like, oh, I have a BSc, what do I do now? There's a reason why they exist. It's not very clear. But the thing is, there are people that you can talk to. There are people who are willing to help you based on their experiences. Because I'm not gonna lie, same with me. I'm learning about what I actually want or how to get to where I want as I'm literally progressing in my career essentially. But talking to people, honestly, that is the best way to go about it. And in terms of whether they're not sure if they should do, for example, postgrad or not, and maybe they worry that they might not be able to handle it or whatnot. The one thing that I learned, the most important thing that I learned during my postgrad career is that you need to know how to use your resources. Everything you need, it's there. The main thing that you need to do is teach yourself on how to actually use the resources that are available for you in order for you to survive, survive doing postgrad or survive being in science. And part of these resources is the people that are there. Talk to the people. They are there to help you and they are willing to help you. And the beauty of postgrad, you've got supervisors that you can talk to. She knows. I'm always in the office asking her things. So you've got your supervisors who are there to also guide you and help you. So there are resources online, there are people in the spaces that you can talk to, but you need to be willing and you need to have the confidence. Because I spoke to one of the undergrad students, she's in your class actually, and she was telling me about how nervous she gets when it comes to trying to talk to supervisors, or not supervisors, to talk to lecturers and other postgrad students. And she says she doesn't have the confidence. And I was telling her like, but how are you supposed to get the information you need, and how are you supposed to know that this is for you if you don't talk to people? You know what I mean? So yeah, so that's you have to get that courage to talk to people. And also, if you don't know how to use, there are so many resources out there. You just need to know how to use them.
I think the courage part, I think that's a big part of a scientist, because I mean, after all, you need to be bold.
Yeah.
Because you may find this out, I may do something different to me and say, actually, that's incorrect. So I think then you need to really be confident and believe in yourself.
The thing is, there's also that imposter syndrome that I only got rid of mine, I think in 2019. That's when it just went away. But it's a thing. We get it. Everybody gets it. But I think one thing that helped me with getting over it was talking to my previous supervisor as well. Like, I think he once told me, because I think we were going to a conference and I was nervous about that because I kept telling him, I don't know if I should be talking about this work. I'm not confident in it. And then he told me, he was like, you are literally an expert of the work that you are doing. Nobody else knows what you're doing. Nobody else has an idea of the things that you got. You are an expert at this moment. And you are going to this space to share the work with these people. So you being nervous and you not wanting to share this work, you're doing yourself and everybody else a disservice. So just take that with you. You're an expert. And I think I've been carrying that with me till this point. Like, I'm an expert in the work that I do. And I go into it with that. Like, I'm an expert. And that also helps with that courage to actually do it and share it with the world.
I think it's pretty important because I would imagine in a science degree, because we're all about being smart, getting the grades. So imposter syndrome is really, I
Yeah.
think you always think someone is doing better than you. There's always that, she looks smart. Like, yeah, so.
When it doesn't really matter, it's about you. In that what you're working with, that's your
Yeah.
thing, and that's why you're also important, and that's why you belong there.
Definitely. So maybe while you're still on that, Dr. Monique, what would you, why is representation important in science? In terms of like maybe having more women in STEM or having more like African males and females in STEM. So why is representation important in science?
Well, I would say that diversity in science is important. I mean, diversity in all areas is important. You know, the research shows that when you have diverse teams, you are better able to actually solve problems, right? So it's important for us as a scientific community to have representation at the highest level, right? But also in terms of our makeup of our different departments, and even our postgraduate students. You know, as the undergraduate students, you look to the students in the next level, and you can't deny it that when you see somebody who looks like you doing something, it reinforces the belief that you can also do it, right? Or the converse is that if you only see a certain kind of person or certain gender doing something, then you think, oh, well, maybe I'm not welcome in that space. And so that's why representation at all levels is important. And ultimately, it's for the good of the scientific endeavor.
I think definitely, I would definitely need diversity in science. And we all belong, guys. We all belong. We all belong. And then maybe, okay, almost to the end. Back at you again. So what would you say currently, where is molecular and cell biology at currently, and what is the future? Where is it headed to?
As a field. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, we've seen the omics expand. Next generation sequencing really transformed the way we do genome sequencing. And so there was an explosion of all these genomes that are now available and transcriptomes that are available. And so that has been a very exciting advance in the field. But the challenge is that now we have that data, we still have to make sense of that data, right? So we still have to make links between how that data actually translates into the biology that we see. And that's actually a much more difficult and slow process. So I think that's where we are. I think, everybody's talking about AI. I think it is very exciting. And there are ways that AI is also changing the way we even analyze data, So, for example, Mlopo does quite a bit of imaging in his study. And the problem with imaging data also is that it's very big. And so you want to capture images. If you're capturing images over time, that can really generate very, very large volumes of big data. And so something that's an application, for example, of AI, where the algorithm can actually learn what you're looking for and then image at a specific interval based on what you're looking for. So that's, so those kind of advances where we can actually use the technology and use the advances in something like artificial intelligence to make what the analysis that we need to do better or more efficient. I think that's where we're going. I think also one of the things that we recognize so we work on bacteria and traditionally we work on populations of bacteria. We culture them all together and you have basically millions and billions of bacteria in your culture flask, and we look at often we look at a response to in the whole population or population wide. So you pull all that and you look at the gene expression in the entire population. So I think we more and more are recognizing the variation in that population and the need to actually analyze single cells, which is a lot more difficult to do with bacteria because they're so tiny. So the technology also needs to advance so that we can do more of that on a single cell level. But we're getting there, and I think that is what is exciting, that the advances in technology are actually driving the field forward.
Yeah, I mean, the future is exciting. And I think in science, we're always going to have question marks, which makes it even more exciting. So if you're into solving problems, then that's definitely the field for you. So maybe in closing to the both of you, so if you think back as to back in the past up until now, where you are in your life, what is one piece of advice you would give to your younger self? In terms of in line with believing in yourself, what's that one piece of advice? Just looking back at how you've advanced, what is one thing that you feel like if you had known it, you would have adjusted easier, or it would have made something easier? Yeah. It is a closing statement.
Monique, do you want to go first?
Okay. I would say one piece of advice I would give to my younger self is, doesn't matter if you're different. So I was one of those kids that didn't really fit in at school, and partly because of being interested in science and being academic, and that wasn't really the popular thing to do. And I think we all go through that as teenagers, where you want to fit in, but now I really don't care. and actually being different is a strength. You're unique and you can embrace your differences. That would be my piece of advice to my younger self.
That is a good one. It
is. It's so similar. I'm thinking the same thing. I'm like, I'll just be like, listen, babes, you belong, okay? You belong. I think that's one of the most important things because, one of the things that pushed me to try to go into the humanities faculty, it was that whole thing of representation. I felt like I didn't belong in that space, and because I couldn't see anyone like me, I couldn't see anyone that approached life the way I approach life, and I just felt like I don't belong. But based on now, also, I really don't care. I'm like, take me as I am, or leave me alone. But also, that'll be unfortunate for you because you won't get to know me.
Yeah.
So, but I think I would just tell my younger self, like, no, you belong, and you matter. Your voice matters, and you've struggled to create, I've struggled to create, to be in a space where I feel like I belong, but I've found the power in creating a safe space for other people to feel like they belong by being myself. So if I exist as my authentic self, I make it easy for other people to exist as themselves as well in that space. So, yeah, you belong. Feel free to be yourself. It's okay.
I think definitely, because I was reading a quote that said, you might not know it, but just by you showing up, someone just is happy. It's like, oh, she showed up. Okay, this is good. So I think it's important to embrace our differences and be confident in yourself. Yeah. So guys, as you can see, scientists are not just nerds. They're actually interesting people. So if you go into the field, you see you have approachable people that know life. So it's not all about the books, guys. It's all about finding the balance in between. And besides, I feel like we still have a lot more questions to answer. So definitely there is a place for you in science. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules for us to have a conversation about this. I'm pretty sure a lot of people will learn more about what's there in MCB here at UCT. And I'm sure we've encouraged one or two aspiring scientists to be in the field. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.